the October 7 attacks that Prime Minister Narendra Modi mentioned in his speech as well. So this is something that we have been seeing. This is how the Arabic media is in fact looking at this address. Let me now go back to Mr. Singh, who is back with us on the broadcast. Mr. Singh, I was just wanting to understand how, we have these global media organizations. They are talking about, especially these Arabic media outlets, they are talking about a very specific balancing act that India has to do in order to maintain its ties with Israel and also with certain countries in the Middle East. How do you look at it?
Clearly, for almost a century, if you look at history, India was very much pro-Arab and very much pro-Palestine, and has gradually, particularly last 20 years or so, or you could go back to 1992 when the diplomatic recognition happened. And we have over a period of time developed a very close partnership with Israel. And therefore, there is no question of India not being seen as tilting increasingly towards Israel, and that automatically makes some Arab nations a bit concerned about it. But I would also like to underline that India has not completely given up on either Palestine or other Arab states. You would remember only late last month, I think, we had this 22 nations of Arab League foreign ministers being hosted in New Delhi. And India clearly clarified its position that it clearly believes in two-state solution, where it sees a viable, sovereign, independent Palestinian state that must be organized ultimately to ensure stability and peace. Only last week at United Nations, India also voted in favor of a resolution criticizing Israel's activities in West Bank, for example. And so it's not that the balancing has not been tried. And now come to the speech that Prime Minister gave in the Knesset. He did mention his support to President Trump's peace plan, which should ensure peace and stability for the entire region. He mentioned including the Palestinians. So there is, in that sense, an effort to sustain certain amount of a balancing act, and India has, of course, that unusual advantage where states that hardly see eye to eye with each other in this region, for example, Israel versus Iran or Saudi Arabia versus UAE or Egypt, all of them feel very comfortable in dealing with.
Mr. Singh, on this, Mr. Singh, you were just talking about this balancing act. Do you believe that India's answer, like the ambassador pointed out, to this hexagon alliance is because it's trying to balance, all the ties?
Definitely, I agree with Ambassador Singhal. India has normally been very, very restrained and definitely not willing to be part of any military alliances. Of course, the hexagon alliance is not supposed to be just, in traditional, conventional military alliance sense. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is talking about coordinating in terms of maritime security, in terms of energy security, and of course, defense included in terms of cooperation in joint development of assets, etc., etc. The fundamental purpose is interesting. Fundamental purpose of bringing US, India, UAE, Greece and Cyprus along with Israel together is to contain Iran. Of course, that is not the kind of effort that India is going to join. India has already been fairly reticent, if not reluctant, in terms of accepting invitation to join the Board of Peace of President Trump, for example. We sent a junior level charge d'affaires from Washington DC to attend the first meeting and claimed ourselves to be observers, and we have not accepted as yet to be members of it. We are studying, as we are saying. So given the turmoil and instability in that region and India's dependence on energy in this region, India will have to be very cautious, and India definitely is doing that. In that sense, we have a very strong relationship with a country like UAE. UAE is third largest trading partner of India, the great source of gas and oil. In that sense, India cannot just, be taking sides here. India wants to build a strong relationship with Israel, no doubt, in areas, sectors where both find each other complementary. but India has also very critical relations with other Gulf countries, and therefore India will stay in that sense very cautious and very restrained. And therefore, you will, so far as Ambassador mentioned, we have not responded. We have not even noted Prime Minister Netanyahu's Hexagon Alliance proposal. In case a direct proposition is made, India most likely, and Ambassador would vouch me, is likely to say we are studying the proposal and we will get back to it whenever we think it is fit for us to get into it or answer it in either way. So caution and balancing is very much central to traditional imaginations or sort of visions of India's foreign policy. And that in this region becomes particularly critical because nations are themselves repeatedly at loggerheads with each other here. Already US and Iran tensions are so strong, which is already giving some color to Prime Minister's visit to Israel. And that caution is, I think, going to be writ large, and therefore whether it is Board of Peace, India will take its own time to decide which side it wants to be or what it wants to do. And definitely, I think on Netanyahu's Hexagon Alliance, we will again be very cautious. We have been very cautious so far, and I don't understand this kind of grouping of Cyprus in it and Greece in it, putting them along with US and Israel and India. I can understand UAE to some extent. It's a kind of off the cuff kind of an arrangement which is proposed. I don't understand the logic of such a arrangement. There could be other important countries which could have been roped into it, but I think it's a kind of a just a proposal to see how people respond to it. Bilateral relations of India-Israel are no doubt unusually growing stronger, and Prime Minister, the way he mentioned of India standing by with full conviction on issues of terrorism. But let me also say this is not very unusual because given the fact, as Ambassador Singhal mentioned, India has been for about 40 plus years facing problem of terrorism for a longer period of time. And Indian Prime Minister, wherever he travels or sometimes when he is hosting foreign delegations or conferences in India, forums in India, he always flags, that terrorism is not only India's problem, it's a global problem. And when he uses the same language in Knesset of Israel, it becomes slightly interesting because Israel itself has showcased a no tolerance, zero tolerance policy towards terrorism. And that kind of coming together of India and Israel, which both believe in zero tolerance, and India's the Prime Minister having laid out a very clear and powerful outline of India's policy on terrorism post Operation Sindoor, and that makes that speech and the mention of terrorism in speech in Knesset of Israel perhaps a little unusual or significant to note. Otherwise, this is a standard concern that Indian Prime Minister's speeches have in all his foreign visits. And I think on that issue also, whether it is intelligence sharing or it is internal security kind of best practices or gadgets or equipment, Israel and India are developing a very strong relationship on that in a whole spectrum of platforms or practices in addressing that issue of internal security, as also of course external security. And General Mathur will vouch me out that it has fructified a great deal and delivered India a good steed in that sense.
Absolutely. Let me rope in
correct anticipation to think that India will be equally friendly with all these countries, because each of these countries have a very niche vantage point which connects them to India. And as we mentioned lately, defense partnership with Israel is unlike any other state. Indeed, if you look at it, the Russian situation, which is our traditional partner, has been stuck with Ukraine crisis, has not been able to supply air defense systems, S-400 air defense systems in time. Other partnership we are exploring, United States has not been able to deliver 100 plus jet engines to us, despite repeated efforts from Indian side to be as lenient as possible. So when India is looking at alternatives, it is not looking at only buying, it's looking at co-development and co-production and potentially exporting those jointly developed defense equipment and systems. And that is where you see only last week the visit of French President Emmanuel Macron underlined how India is building a very strong defense partnership with France. which is often India's largest defense partner now, potentially definitely the largest defense partner. And second is Israel. Now, difference in case of France and Israel is that they are willing to transfer technology. Not 100%, but they are willing to transfer technology. For example, in terms of France, Rafale, certain technologies, particularly for example, the core source code, etc., of Rafale are in question, whether France is willing to share. In case of Israel also, whether they will share that new Iron Beam, the laser weapon, which is supposed to be a defense system, also to make a defense system cheaper and more efficient, whether they will easily share that advanced technology with India. But they are relatively more fine in sharing development of technologies together in terms of jointness. Vantage point that Israel sees in India, other than the general mention that India being the largest destination, almost 34% of their defense equipment is exported to India. Last 4 years, 2020 to 24, we imported $20 billion worth of defense equipment. In this visit, insinuations are we could be signing for another $8.5 billion worth of imports of various defense equipment from Israel. So definitely Israel sees us as a major destination for defense exports.
Right.
But also in the sense of scaling all the innovations.
Mr. Singh, I apologize for interrupting you, but we are getting live visuals from Jerusalem where Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Israel.
It will come out in the MOUs, I'm sure of that.
Absolutely. And Mr. Singh, now that we have discussed the geopolitics of it, what, as per your observation, can be some of the key areas that we will be looking at? Because at 4 p.m. we might just see a joint statement from both the countries. What, as per your understanding, can be some areas which will be highlighted apart from defense?
I think definitely the big attraction that India has in Israel is best practices in several sectors, particularly in, for example, drip irrigation, water management, water conservation, and therefore use of AI in all of these sectors. And then of course quantum technologies would be another area. I think there could be some initiatives in terms of enhancing people-to-people linkages, could be education sector as well. So we might see series of agreements being signed in an hour or so. But I think joint statement is going to be most interesting. And right from the beginning, the body language of two leaders and the language of two leaders, you would have noticed that Prime Minister Modi has used this kind of technique very often to publicly demonstrate the warmth, whether it is with a Chinese leader or it is with an American president or it is with the Israeli Prime Minister. So it's not just simply building chemistry and building bonhomie, but also displaying it to the world. That has shown Prime Minister Netanyahu coming to the airport, traveling in the same car, talking of Indian Prime Minister more than a friend, calling him brother. That bonhomie demonstration and display of that is also something which is interesting to showcase how India has become welcome country, given the fact that it is the fastest growing economy, and our middle class today is larger than the total population of United States. So what Israel sees is that whenever it is doing out of the box innovation in different sectors, it has an enormous space and geography and young talent in this country, large consuming population in this country, to scale that at an enormous larger scale. And India likewise is striking that bargain very carefully, as Ambassador and General both underlined. The way India negotiates now, looking at what it can offer in terms of being an enormous space for investments in infrastructure, in space for market, consumption, co-production, that leverage India's diplomacy is increasingly using now, and therefore it's the kind of hard bargain that we strike. For example, there was an anticipation that during President Macron's visit, maybe we will sign that deal for 104 Rafales. But I think I can only, imagine that this is the hard bargaining, that despite the fact that Defense Acquisition Council had cleared that proposal just few days before the visit. The visit passed and we still have not signed that deal. So it's a hard bargaining, which is again going to be visible and interesting part of looking at how India engages Israel, despite the public bonhomie and friendship. At the base of it, there's a hard bargain that is taking place from both sides. And India would like to aim at certain technologies like the iron beam that we are discussing. Whether India, when it starts talking about co-development and sharing and procurement of some of those iron dome technologies, whether it is long range, medium range or short range air defense systems, whether we can also go a step forward and access iron beam, which is a laser weapon that Israel has developed. Israel is definitely today among the frontiers of ballistic missile defense. You would remember in June last year when Iran had hit them with 550 missiles and 1,000 plus drones. Israeli claims, if you believe them, said that they intercepted and killed 99% of drones and 86% of incoming missiles. Now that's a very impressive imagination, as General would vouch me, to show the strength of any technology and how they can operationalize that technology. So that kind of attraction that Israel has for India, which has China and Pakistan who are constantly expanding their missiles and nuclear weapons and everything else, and India has to be careful with that. And if we want to build a very strong ballistic missile defense, we of course have our own laboratory experiments and controlled experiments of BMDs in India have fairly been successful so far. But to scale them to the geography of India, to ensure that the entire interior space of India is ensured of safety against any incoming drones or missiles. We saw some of that happening in Operation Sindoor.
Yeah.
So in that sense, hard bargaining, I think, is something which should be equally area of focus to look at how two nations are building bonhomie, but at core of it are also striking very hard bargaining as to what they want to do in terms of give and take.
Absolutely.
We both see each other as not just good partners, but mutually beneficially partners.
I think it's a lesson in diplomacy, how you run diplomacy, because we are seeing Benjamin Netanyahu come out in Indian attire. His wife also welcomed Prime Minister Narendra